With a seemingly incessant talk of impeachment in the air, the 2020 presidential election already exposing the deep divides within American politics that plays out on a daily basis in a seemingly non-stop bombardment from various news outlets, fears that were once relegated to the fever dreams of conspiracy theorists have increasingly become a part of everyday discourse in America. Inevitably, a troubling question that was once considered implausible has made its way to the surface and must be answered. At what point does all the alarmist talk of civil war move from mere chatter to reality? In this video, we'll look at 7 signs that, while viewed independently of one another, may not necessarily lead to a civil war in the United States, but should they converge simultaneously, the question has to be asked: could their combined collective energy result in the tearing of the very fabric of our society, resulting in a civil war or all-out collapse? A recent study was conducted in which 31% of likely U.S. voters saying it's likely that the United States will experience a second civil war sometime in the next 5 years. At the moment, while talk of civil war may be exaggerated, the possibility this event could occur stems from real problems within our country, namely the eroding confidence in our democratic institutions and our gridlocked federal government. The warning signs are concerning many political scientists who study civil wars. The precursors leading to such an event are typically high levels of corruption, poor governance, and the mistrust of the institutions meant to serve the population. In this video, we'll discuss 7 signs that by themselves may not be the canary in the coal mine. Should several of them continue to escalate and combine at the same time, the results could be catastrophic. Number 1 is increasing partisanship. Over the last 10 years, the divisions between the 2 primary political parties has continued to grow even larger. The dominant items that are being hotly debated and are split among party lines are role of government in our daily lives. Should the government take a bigger or smaller role in our lives? Examples can be seen in our healthcare system and college system. Who is responsible for paying for these services and institutions? Another item is immigration. This issue alone continues to spark huge debate and is hotly contested among party lines, often driving a wedge between neighbors. Racial discrimination. And another big one is environmental protection. Do humans play a role in climate change, and if so, who is responsible? Gone are the days of political parties working together, and even more rare to see bills passed through the House and Senate where unanimous agreement is reached. This growing division, vitriol rhetoric, and resentment has invariably spilled out into the general population and news outlets. At a time where we're supposedly more connected through social media, the ability to express anger and hate has been magnified, driving people deeper into their entrenched beliefs, impeding constructive dialogue to find solutions. Arguments have become very binary with no compromise considered by either side. America has gone through a lot of tumultuous periods in our history, but the ever-increasingly unraveling of the last few decades really has no modern parallel. We're seeing more and more zero-sum politics in Washington, in which parties are fighting each other with scorched-earth tactics. At the moment, all signs point to this getting even worse. Lincoln once warned, "A house divided cannot stand." We're already divided. The real question is, how much longer can we stand? The inevitable outcome of this deep division leads us to our next point: dysfunctional governance. U.S. democracy in recent years has become appallingly dysfunctional. As mentioned in the previous point, when's the last time you saw our government institutions produce real solutions for the average citizen? Institutions once designed to protect the American political system through deliberately slow-moving political changes, preventing extreme changes through checks and balances, has resulted in gridlock. As a result, many see the system as unable or unwilling to change and are left thinking the structure is rigged, breeding mistrust. In addition, a growing apprehension in the voting system has left many to believe the system is rigged. As we watch the catastrophe which is played out in Venezuela, individuals are beginning to ask if the same thing could happen here. In times like this, it is easy to look for someone who promises to cut through the mess. When Hugo Chavez came to power in the late 90s, he promised to sweep away an established ruling class and was going to remove the democratic institutions that stood in the way. People wanted a new system, a new structure, and they got it in the form of socialism, which we'll discuss more in point number 7. As we're seeing an increasingly fractured government, which only seems to fight based on party lines, more and more Americans are becoming jaded by the system meant to serve them. As mentioned earlier, one of the primary precursors is civil unrest, and eventually civil wars is strong mistrust in the government. Once trust has completely eroded in the institutions meant to serve them, people no longer fear the boundaries and inevitably lash out. Number 3 is impeachment and coup rhetoric. At the beginning of President Trump's time in office, talk of a coup or overthrow was not that far-fetched. The intelligence community seemed to be digging up material on the president, which pointed to the need to oust him from office. After the Mueller report came out, the notion seemed to have subsided, displaced in recent months, and even more so in the last several weeks with talk of impeachment. At the beginning of President Trump's time in office, The discussion was not just impeachment, but complete overthrow. In the short time I've lived my life, I don't think I ever recall the idea that a sitting president could conceivably be ousted in a coup. What if the intelligence community collaborated to take down the administration? In July of 2016, the FBI launched a counterintelligence investigation into possible links between the Russian government and Trump. Had the information pointed to a connection between the two parties, which some still argue to this day in fact did happen, what then? While I'm not taking sides in this discussion, I'm merely pointing out that we're witnessing discord within our nation that threatens our very stability. If we were to truly witness an overthrow of this administration, could our nation stabilize enough to stand fast? As pointed out in the first 2 points, with the instability, partisanship, and government gridlock, if the administration were to be toppled, these events could lead to an uprising within an already splintered and divided nation. Having covered the arena of politics in our last 3 points, let's look at other issues our nation faces. Number 4 is a widening wealth gap. Between 2007 and 2016, the median upper income family, those who make more than $127,000, rose from 40 times to 75 times the wealth of the median low income family, those who make less than $42,000 a year. Numerous other statistics can be referenced which all point to the same conclusion. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. There's a number of factors that have led to this. The wealthy have been able to capitalize on investment opportunities after the market crash of 2007, whereas the poor were only driven deeper into poverty. A global market in which jobs are being outsourced to nations where wages are significantly lower, which is increasingly crippling the middle class. Stagnation in pay raises, while at the same time inflation in costs of things such as healthcare, rent, food. With the current projections showing this ever-increasing income gap growing wider, the question has to be asked, what happens next? A fascinating article I read a few years ago spells this out very clearly. The article is entitled, "The Pitchforks Are Coming for Us, Plutocrats." In the article, which I'll link to in the description section below, the author, who is extremely wealthy, laments the fact that the current inequality is not sustainable and will ultimately end when people revolt. There was a time not that long ago in America where wealth inequality was not nearly as extreme as it is now. As people impacted by this problem ruminate on this issue, realizing no one is coming to the rescue, it leaves many feeling hopeless with few options. Many people, as a result, fantasize and even welcome a complete collapse in our nation for what they hope will usher in a great reset, which I'll address at the end of this video. Number 5 is a further entrenching oligarchy. Oligarchy is defined as a small group of people having control of a country, organization, or institution. I think by now it comes as no surprise that the US government does not represent the interests of the majority of this country's citizens, but is instead ruled by the rich and powerful. In the past, saying something like this out loud would have been considered conspiracy theory talk. A report out of Princeton entitled Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, Interest Groups, and Average Citizens studied U.S. policy data between 1981 and 2002, and it concluded that the United States is dominated by its economic elite. The study holds that policy outcomes tend to tilt toward the wishes of corporations and businesses and professional associations. In line with this entrenched oligarchy, corporatism has increasingly put a stranglehold on American politics. A landmark U.S. court ruling every American should understand is the Citizens United ruling. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission in 2010 concluded that political spending is a form of protected speech under the First Amendment, and the government may not keep corporations or unions from spending money to support or denounce individual candidates in elections. As a result of this ruling, corporations have been given the ability to effectively sway election results by dumping huge amounts of money behind politicians and laws that benefit them directly. Even more disturbing is dark money, which refers to political spending by nonprofits that do not publicly disclose donors. Between the oligarchy, the corporations, and dark money flowing into our political system, the everyday person just trying to work in order to support their family is left with little hope. How do you fight a system with far more resources that is effectively stacked against you? In line with our previous points, all it takes for a civil war to be realized is a mistrust of the government agencies. When the system continues to grow bigger and bigger, people will ultimately have nothing to lose. What then? Number 6 is the rise of extremist ideologies. Neo-Nazi groups in the US have witnessed a startling growth of 22% just in 2017 alone. I guess I thought I'd never live to see the day that the Nazi Party could take hold in America. My grandfather was a Marine wounded in combat fighting the Axis powers in World War II. Yet here we are in 2019 with this ideology and very similar and somewhat neo-Nazi friendly political views on the rise. Another party making an uprise is the Communist Party. The global financial crisis affected many people and left the sense that today's youth are worse off than their parents. People are left feeling capitalism has failed them, and they're looking for a system they believe will counter the oligarchy, corporatism, and unregulated capitalism. Another very similar party is socialism. Like communism, a move towards socialism is growing in the United States. A recent poll found that 4 out of 10 Americans embrace socialism. With the growing discontent that the system has left them behind, people are looking for other systems. Ideals and beliefs that most would not have considered a few years ago are rising from people's frustrations that feel they've been left far behind. With the atmosphere charged with angst, it's no wonder we're seeing such fringe ideologies springing up. And the last point, number 7, is AI. I put this item last on my list as this is something I'll discuss in future videos. The rise of AI, or artificial intelligence, is one of those items that everyday people are overlooking much to their own detriment. Most of us consider our jobs to be secure, but what if in 5 to 10 years you can be replaced by programming, which can do your job much more efficiently? Let's take a simple example which is already happening. Tesla and other auto manufacturers are already implementing AI in their autonomously driven cars. That doesn't sound so bad, right? Honestly, I welcome this as I've seen my fair share of idiots on the road. But what if in 5 years, truck drivers and taxi drivers are replaced by this technology? A large group of people will be unemployed. And this is only the beginning. AI is set to replace many jobs once considered only doable by a human, but technology is proving otherwise. Once a large job force is displaced and cannot be employed, discontent and unease will invariably be the result. As pointed out in point number 5 earlier, corporations and the oligarchy are increasingly defining our laws, which solely benefit themselves. If you are simply an inconvenience for a company that can be replaced by a more efficient machine, why not just get rid of the worker? What would protect you from this happening? The implications are far-reaching, especially in the discussion of a potential civil war, an uprising, or revolt. I would end this discussion encouraging you to study a few different events in history in light of the items we discussed in this video. 2 events which have very similar parallels are the Bolsheviks Revolution of 1917 and the French Revolution. Many of the points discussed in this video, except AI of course, were precursors to these revolutions and uprisings. Let me point out that I have lived in a country where civil war has ravaged the nation in indescribable ways. I'm not advocating violence or revolt against our current government in this video. Things should always be handled as amicably as possible through diplomacy. Having lived in a nation, Afghanistan, which was ravaged by years of fighting, I can attest to how deplorable this can be. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comments section. Do you agree or disagree with these points? What do you think will happen in the next 5 years? Will we see a civil war, an uprising, or revolt in the United States? As always, be safe out there.